Hi, I'm Dr. Amy French. I'm a history professor at Delta College. I'm also the coordinator of the Humanities Learning Center. And this year is 2020, and it's the centennial anniversary, the centennial of women getting the vote in America, in the United States. And so, as you can imagine, before COVID hit, I had tons of brown bag presentations lined up, many for Women's History Month, which was in March, which is coincided with when we closed down. And many for August this month when women officially got the vote. And I didn't want to let this go, unnoticed. I figured, okay, I'll use technology and we will still have a abridged version of the brown bag that I was planning on offering several times throughout the course of 2020 face-to-face. So here goes nothing. I'm going to start talking to you. We're going to break it down into two parts. The first part will kind of lead up to when things change, maybe the old guard, we'll call it, of suffrage. And so I like to call these misbehaving women. And I'm going to share my screen here with you so that you can see my PowerPoint as I talk. And Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, an amazing historian in her own right, in one of her works had a line in it. And from it, it's launched 1,000 bumper stickers, I think, that well-behaved women seldom make history. And that's true. When we think about who do we, who makes history? Who are the people that we think of? We think of generally the ones who are misbehaving, right? Because up until really quite recently in global history has been written by those people who were the degree, the learned people. And women weren't allowed to be those people. And so we tended not to be able to write our own history. And so you don't find us in the normal places. And I mean, there are other reasons, and I could go on for quite some time about them, but that's kind of where we take this from. And so when we look at the 19th century, the 1800s, and the real start of the suffrage movement in the United States of America, women are in two separate spheres. And so we have what we call the separate spheres of doctrine, that there are complementary but exclusive spheres of action for men and women. For men, this is a public place for them. Their place is out in the public. They have a sphere of action in leadership. For the women, theirs is private. They're to inspire. They're to insist. They're to build people up. Here's, I think a good cartoon. And so woman's sphere, and she's kind of peering over the fence, and, here's a gossip and fashion and little doll in the boat. And it says, woman devotes her time to gossip and clothes because she has nothing else to talk about. Give her broader interests and she will cease to be vain and frivolous. So some of the women are trying to break free from this confine that really, they're challenging this, and they're talking about individual rights, and they're talking about life and liberty and property and happiness. And you have women who are also very involved in the abolition movement. They're anti-slavery. They're trying to end slavery. And these women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, they're influenced by things that are going on in their realm. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she had gone to an abolitionist conference where she was excluded because she was a woman. And so when she gets back, she and others, they meet in Seneca Falls, and they have the first women's rights convention in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. And here is a cartoon kind of showing this. And it's interesting if you can see what's going on here, because women had often been excluded into the balcony or behind a curtain at conventions. And so here they're showing men excluded. And there's always a lot of fear mongering going on in these kind of cartoons. And so at the Seneca Falls Convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton declares she was, when she even said this, here's this progressive woman in many ways. her, when she said she was bringing up suffrage, her father had her check for signs of insanity, you know. And so about, fewer than 300 women and men gathered in Seneca Falls for the first convention. The participants ranged from 14-year-old Susan Quinn to 68-year-old George Pryor. And then 68 women and 32 men signed their names to this declaration, the Declaration of Sentiments. And of the men was the noted abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And then, just as Thomas Jefferson had done with the Declaration of Independence, the attendees put out their complaints, just as we had the revolutionaries had once put out their complaints against the Crown of England. They put out their complaints against the system, the societal confines, the political confines of the United States of America. And they point out, he has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she has no voice. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. And that was coverture. Coverture meant that when a woman was married, she no longer had any real rights to herself. She couldn't sue. If she was assaulted, her husband would have to bring claims. And so they also say he has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she has earned. They talk about it, making her morally irresponsible, as her husband is held responsible for her dealings. She's taxed without representation. Men monopolize all the profitable industries. The women are denied an education. That there's no public participation in church or government. That they're given a different code of morals, and it makes them dependent. And in the end, they say he has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it his right to assign for her a sphere of action when that belongs to her conscience and her God. The resolutions range, from an access to professions and education, to rights as mothers and wives, to moral conscience. But the most controversial assertion was that women should have the vote. After this, women went on the circuit. They rode around. They talked about suffrage. It grew haphazardly. People like Lucy Stone would travel all around. Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth, Mary Ann Shedd Carey. These women, they went all around, and they stirred up some trouble. I mean, there was a lot of, here's a cartoon, kind of fear mongering, and it says, women's rights, and the police says, I will take him to the polls, madam, and see that he votes as you dictate. And you see this broken, abused man who is in physically, smaller stature than the woman. Even the cop is slightly more diminutive than the woman in this picture. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton pithily kind of addresses it, and she says, I fear you think the new woman is going to wipe you off the planet, but be not afraid. All who have mothers, sisters, wives, or sweethearts will be very well looked after. And so in the end, as we move towards the new era, you start to see change happening. We start to see, constitutionalizing of women's rights. Radical Republicans had contended that pursuing women's rights and Black suffrage would doom Black suffrage. And indeed, when the 15th Amendment is passed, because when the 14th Amendment was passed, and the 14th Amendment gave citizenship, and said that no state can abridge those people who are citizens, and it acknowledges that citizens are those people who are born or naturalized in the United States of America. And so some women thought, okay, then I have the right to vote. This is it, I have it. And so the 15th Amendment is then passed, which says you cannot use race to disenfranchise people. So it explicitly says, it says, it forbade disenfranchisement on grounds of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So it says we're talking about formerly enslaved men, not women. And so suffragists then are kind of split over, well, do we endorse the 15th Amendment or do we not endorse this? The American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Lucy Stone, they tend to side with the radical Republicans. They say endorse it. The National Women's Suffrage Association, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they broke with the radicals. And they start, talking about suffrage being a natural right. In this cartoon, you see the antis here, and they say suffrage is not a natural right. Women don't no business. Women would lose their influence. Bad women would outvote good ones. And so those are all the antis. And then in Minor versus Hamperset, the discussion was curbed for quite some time when Virginia Minor sued the official who wouldn't let her vote, and the Supreme Court declared voting isn't a right, but a privilege bestowed by the federal government. And so after that, the National Women's Suffrage Association will go for then an amendment. But some of the states, we do start to see some of the states enfranchising, and we see women in the West starting to get the vote. So that concludes our little story for today. And I will join you again in a little bit with another part of this as women actually get the vote. So that's the lead up. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this little video. Take care.